republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mary Ann, could you do, or Sherelle, could you do roll call, please?
Budget Committee Member George Fisher.
Here.
Budget Committee Member Laura Fisher.
Here.
Budget Committee Member Lance Masters.
Yes.
Budget Committee Member Tiffany Pruitt.
Yes.
Budget Committee Member Tom Cranlett.
Here.
Budget Committee Chair Sandra Kelly.
Here.
Budget Committee Vice Chair Kevin Benson.
Here.
Budget Committee Member Eva Zerfy.
She called me and said she was, might be late. She has a cold too, and she'll be out all next week because she's doing some training.
Budget Committee Member Darlene Solinger.
Here.
Budget Committee Member Shauna Hazel.
Here.
Budget Committee Member Karen Sight.
Here.
Budget Committee Member Guy DeHee.
Here.
Budget Committee Member Bobby Walker. Budget Committee Member Don Heath.
Here.
Thank you.
Did Bobby Walker call in to ask to be excused?
I have not heard from him.
I don't have that.
So he called in when he came in.
Okay, now, next on the agenda is discussion of the following funds, but, approval of minutes, and the minutes aren't ready, and we wouldn't have really wanted to take the time to read them right now, and so we're going to put that off, we're gonna table that until the next meeting. And I do notice that there's a letter included in left on our desk from the Parks and Recreation Department. Do we want to redesignate this money or discuss this?
Maybe Karen wants to talk about it.
Is there anybody?
Maybe Karen wants to.
Sharon?
Well, I wasn't sure how that money was coming about, and I just felt like, or it was mostly just me, I felt like that our program here was coming along fairly well, although it could always be improved upon. And I thought that if the library needed the money to get started, but I've been informed by several people since then that that probably isn't so, and that was one of our questions. So the rec committee has come up with some good ideas that we could use that money for if it is indeed given to the Parks and Rec for their use.
Okay. Would anybody like to comment? I believe that the committee designated that money to make up for a shortfall that had been, money that had been taken away from you at one point. And the committee felt as a whole at the time that we were all being taxed an extra amount for our library, and that would be our contribution. And it was pretty much their responsibility now to take care of the library with those additional funds that are being collected here in Cascade Locks.
Okay.
So we felt as a committee that this would be the recommendation that we would provide for the city council.
Okay, because the Parks and Rec we do have plans, things that we could be doing, we could improve, we were just thinking, or I was, status quo, that if we have money, we can expand on our program.
How much money was removed from your program at one point?
It was half, about 2 years ago, I believe.
And that was how much?
Let's see, 1,500 half of everything. So 1,500 for the employees and salaries and for activity or the materials.
Oh, $7,000.
Yeah, that's probably about right. Yeah.
Well,
Salaries and hours or
I'm sorry.
was the salary in hours or in wage?
Summer rec is in wage.
So your wage was lower?
Yes, and so the program is lowered for that reason. And the evening youth activities are hourly. They have an hourly thing, or we do. I'm one of them.
well, this is the type of activity that money has historically been designated to help the community out some way. And is there comments from committee members?
Just a couple of questions here, 3 and 4, it says, if the money isn't used up by the new budget, do we lose it or does it roll over? And I think we discussed that it was our intention that that money would roll over. Did we talk about that? Would roll over into the
It
account?
is reflected, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me, Mary Ann, if I'm wrong, in the beginning balance, if it isn't all used.
That is correct.
So they would get to keep that. And then it says, can it be used to help pay salary for youth activities directors? I don't think there's any stipulations on that money.
I think that that money, at this point, since your committee will be getting it, will probably have to be budgeted, won't it, Mary Ann?
Yes, it will.
And at that time, you'll decide things like that, or that kind of thing will be decided and approved. Tom?
I just wanted to add on the library, apparently, ask on it, we give them the room, we pay the utilities, and that's where, I'm sure that's what we will continue to do that. So the library board has that, already has that benefit along with the tax benefit from us.
So they're doing okay.
They should be doing okay.
They're doing better than we are.
Yes.
Well, Parks and Rec can use that money, and some of the things we were thinking about, and I don't know if you're even interested, would be perhaps hiring someone younger than me who will actually get out there and play basketball with those kids or something. You know, so if we have, and maybe get the summer program going up again, if we can get a driver, and, you know, we have plans.
Okay, could I have a consensus that we're going to leave our recommendation as it was? Everybody in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed, please say aye. So we'll leave our recommendation as it was.
Thank you very much, we will use it well.
Okay, now, I had an issue that I brought to Mary Ann's attention today, and that was my lack of understanding on how the cash revenues reflected, if they're, when it says current to 1/1, I want to explain to the public that is what we're seeing here. We're seeing this in basically 5 lines. We have the actuals from 2008 and 9. We have the actuals from 9 and 9/10. We have what was budgeted for 10/11, and then we have what is current through 1/31/11. And I was a bit confused because we kept hearing conversation about the $20,000 that Multnomah County owes the EMS. And when I was looking at my Fund 5, I noticed that that is already reflected as a received revenue. And I found that to be quite confusing, but Mary Ann explained that better than I could, and so I'd like to ask her if she couldn't explain that discrepancy to the committee, because what we're looking at is current through 1/31/11 may not actually be reflective of the real situation. And that is why Mary Ann provided for us, saw it here a minute ago. I'm sorry.
This right here.
Yeah, cash balances as of March 31st, 11. And this takes us farther than the 131 reflected in our budget balances. So this is a true indication of what has come in, actually been collected, not just billed for. And I'll let Mary Ann explain that, if you wouldn't mind, Mary Ann.
I'll do my best, Sandra, to explain it. As far as the $20,000, we invoiced Multnomah County in January, and when I invoice in government accounting, you invoice the amount, the $20,000 goes into revenue, and then as the revenues come in, it comes out of accounts receivable. So you have a double entry there. The accounts receivable, as you'll see on March 31st, is $86,000. That means that we have bills out there totaling $86,000. That is including Springfield, which is our billing agency for the ambulance, plus the 20,000 from Multnomah County. So we recognize the revenue, because it will come in, but it's in accounts receivable. We haven't got it yet. We have been doing due diligence this last week and trying to get a commitment from Multnomah County, because they have not sent us any money. We finally got an answer that they will be sending a check out on May 10th, and we should get it on, obviously, about the 12th. And we have already billed them for the other 10. They requested it in 2 separate invoices. We first billed them at 20,000, and then they called back, could we have 2 separate invoices so they could split the payment? That's why what you see in the cash in Fund 5, okay? We will have it in May and hopefully by the end of June. And it's the same thing with ambulance billings. We're waiting for the money to come in, and as it comes in, it comes out of the accounts receivable portion, which is a balance sheet account, not a revenue expense account.
Will that be a percentage of the ambulance billings, or you don't really know yet?
No, when the accounts receivable comes in, when I get a sheet from Springfield, at the time that I recognize those billings, 32% of that is written off into uncollectibles. And that's the percentage that the auditor has recommended, because that's an overall average of what happens. He then adjusts it at the end of the year. If we receive more revenue than we've written off, then he will adjust it and credit the revenue back to the EMS. But that is an average of what our auditor is recommending that we write off at the time that I receive the accounts receivable.
And so that reflects, this 86,000 reflects the 33%?
Yes.
Don?
Mary, why is it better to enter it as a receivable? when it's not?
Because that's governmental accounting, and I wish I could tell you. Your personal accounting for your personal home life is totally different than government. And when I first started in government, it was backwards to the way you do it at home. But that is the general accepted accounting principles for government.
You must have a different setup on writing checks also.
Yes, they do. So that's the best I can explain it.
Okay, thanks.
Would there be any other questions at this time about that issue? To me, it's very confusing, I'll have to admit. And my question also was, that is true with the ambulance billing, so when it's billed, that's reflective of revenues received? Mary Ann?
When it's billed, we continue getting that. Let me retract that. Let me think. You know, I think I better back up on the ambulance billing. Because we just received $14,000 in the mail today, and we credited Fund 5 in the revenues. You know, can I retract that, and can I look into that? Because you agree that government accounting is totally different.
Well,
I have to look back on that just to make sure I'm not telling you wrong.
Right, but it has to be understandable
Yes.
to the budget committee.
And I can look back at the break, when you take a break,
Okay,
and
that
look
would be
back at my
great.
sheet, and then I can bring it to you. I just want to make sure I'm telling you right and not misleading,
Okay.
please.
And on our agenda, I noticed that the capital reserve fund is last, and I'm not sure that we won't have some discussion before we go to approve that fund, and it could be carried over. Do you think that we should decide what funds we're going to do at the end of the evening, or now? What do you think?
At the end, see how far we get through this list.
Okay. Okay, and so the first fund that we'll tackle is the cemetery fund, page 28 of your notebook.
Section.
Yep,
Section 2.
yep.
Okay.
Section section 2.28.
God.
I guess I would have a question right off the bat on this, and that is, why are we keeping so much in the contingency fund? Because it was my understanding contingency funds were not the proper place to save money. And you can only, basically, you can have quick access to contingency funds for unexpected purchases up to 15% of the fund can be taken from the contingency. And I guess you can take more with a supplemental budget. Is that, I mean, is there a reason why that is being shown in the contingency instead of at the beginning balance?
Well, your beginning, if I may, Madam Chair, your beginning balance is based on this year's ending balance. Okay, so if the contingency, which in my experience since I've been here has never been touched for cemetery, it would roll over into the next year's balance, giving you approximately $22,000 in the beginning balance next year. Not 11-12, but 12-13, should we not expend all of that. So it does roll over into the beginning balance. But I can't give you a more beginning balance than what my ending balance is going to be this year.
Okay, now would there be a way to budget that other than in the contingency?
I think you can transfer to the cemetery trust fund, because it's my understanding, based on the cemetery fund, we're trying to get it to be perpetual care. In other words, be able to self-sustain itself. And that's my understanding of the trust fund. And if anybody knows anything different, please let me know, because
I believe there's a statutory requirement for cemeteries to have a certain amount of money set aside in a trust for perpetual care of the site. I don't know what the amount is, but I know that there is a statute that addresses that.
Is there a cemetery company or something that does that?
I beg your pardon, ma'am?
Is there a cemetery committee or something that does know?
There's
So that there would be a reason.
There's a cemetery trust fund that we're doing tonight as well, right?
yes.
Yes, it was.
Should we do those two things together and consider changing that money, or would you like to leave it as it is? Somebody have a motion?
I'd like to know what the law is. If there's a law that says we're supposed to meet certain requirements, I think that this fund should be realizing those laws. Was there the contingencies?
Well, the only thing that I know, and this is the way it's been done, I guess we could approve it as it is, and it's something that we could look into for next year's budget. But I do remember at our seminar at the Department of Revenue and reading that a contingency fund is not a proper place to try to save money, and it's best just to keep a certain amount, what you think you may need to use in case of an emergency, but not use that as a source of savings. So if we have a cemetery trust fund, which is on page 25 of the same section.
33, actually.
33?
Yeah,
Oh, okay, sorry.
on 25. So of this transfer from the cemetery fund, was that the $2,000 here that?
Yes. Yes.
So, isn't there a percentage, a maximum percentage of the budgeted amount you can use for the contingency?
What do you mean?
I believe they recommend 10%.
15, I think.
is it 15? 10 or 15% of the actual budget
For contingency.
for contingency, yes. Now, you can transfer more over to the cemetery trust fund,
You might get a little interest.
but be aware that out of the cemetery trust fund, only interest can be spent. This is the fund that the maintenance and everything comes out of. So
The
the
contingency is where?
contingency, only interest can be spent in the trust fund. I'm sorry, I got you confused, I know, because I just confused myself.
Okay, so say it right.
Okay, in the cemetery trust fund, the contingency, only the interest can be spent out of the contingency, is my understanding. So, I guess what I'm saying, you can put more over into the trust fund, and I believe you can still, I'm gonna have to look into that with the ORSs.
I really don't think that needs to be growing anymore. It's already at a healthy amount.
The trust fund?
No,
Trust or
the
Contingency.
contingency. And that it should be transferred, part of it should be transferred over to an interest-bearing. Are there any other questions about any of the other line items that any budget committee members have? Dora? Or Laura?
I had a question about the wages and just that, in the actuals of 0809 and 910, talking 1,000, then they're real kind of like sporadically, and I'm just wondering how those are figured out. How you come to your, proposed
How is that calculated, Mary Ann?
calculated.
When the maintenance, when Public Works works in the cemetery, they put it on their time card, and that is how we gauge, that's how we pay our wages, is they tell us when they work in the cemetery. Now, when they had, Multnomah County or Hood River had a work crew, they would do the work, so we didn't have the impact of wages. But it is based on when the guys tell us that they've worked in the cemetery.
So our Public Works Department, when they are able to schedule it in, is kind of how this.
Well, they do the mowing,
I understand.
and then, of course, on Memorial Day weekend, they do a lot of the work then.
So those scheduled kind of,
yes.
we kind of know those are gonna take place.
Those are gonna take
And we
place.
know our guys are gonna.
And our summer seasonal help also works in the cemetery, and that is also charged to them.
And I imagine they budget more, and so, you know, you can't budget less. Otherwise, if you have more work, you would have to do a resolution to allow them more money. So they're budgeting plenty to allow that. Because
And-
they've never used anywhere near that amount.
So
Madam Chair,
Yes, George,
can I
I'm
ask
sorry.
a question, Mary Ann? So Mary Ann, if we were to take half of the contingency money and put it into the cemetery trust fund, would half be, in your mind, a sufficient amount for contingency?
Yes, it would be.
Okay,
Mhm.
all right, then with that, I would like to make a motion that the budget committee move to put half of the money that's in contingency into the cemetery trust fund.
I'll second the motion.
are you saying $4,000? Are you saying $4,112?
Did you put a dollar amount on
Does that make sense? Yeah,
Yeah.
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I need the dollar amount.
yep,
Or we could make it an even
Or
amount.
Could please make it an even amount,
could do that
would you
too.
please?
Let's make it
$4,000.
$4,000.
This is an estimate.
Let's, okay, I move that we take $4,000 out of the contingency fund and put it into the cemetery trust fund.
I'll second that motion.
That increases the transfer to 6.
Yes, that increases
So-
the transfer to 6.
Question?
You say, so we're going to up $2,000 to $6,000?
Yes.
And then reduce that to 4,325?
Are there any other issues with this? With these line items? Tom?
Just a question on that, is that, so the trust fund, what is that money going in, what will that eventually be, potentially
cemetery's full, there's no more plots to be sold. It's there to maintain the cemetery in the future, because there wouldn't be any more revenue coming into the cemetery at that point, right? So there has to be some money set aside as a trust for the maintenance.
And you can only, even when it is full, you only get to use the interest?
I don't know this on.
I mean,
The idea is to have
If you
enough,
got $100 in interest, well, I get $100 in interest right now.
the idea is to have
This
enough,
has to be a pretty big fund.
to have enough interest income by the time the cemetery's full, that it can
Be
Pay for
self-sustained.
over time.
Interesting, principle is well.
And it does seem like that's a really healthy contingency in that department for the size of the budget.
So it's that way, would you?
Basically.
Guida?
Well, I have a.
Wait, one conversation,
One
please.
item is
We got a side conversation going on here, so let's get that one out of the way first, please.
What are you talking about?
Laura and Kevin are talking about trying to straighten this one. Okay. Sorry.
Okay, Guida?
Well, I was gonna just ask, maybe this is not exactly the right time, but do they, I know that there's a water system that is not working too well. Is that budgeted this year?
I thought the water system was working
Well,
fine, so
there
I've
have
not been informed of
There's
that.
about 5 dead roadies on the south side.
Okay, to repair the water system or replace roadies or anything comes out of Fund 17 as property maintenance, materials, fences, and shrubs.
Okay.
It does not come out of the trust fund. We don't spend out of the trust fund. We try to put the money into the
You
trust.
have $2,000 budgeted for
Yeah.
such repairs.
Maintenance,
Yes.
exactly.
And you have a very healthy contingency if there's something else that needs to be done.
Well, I just wondered if it was budgeted. Yeah, thanks.
No, I don't see that it is. Could I have a motion to accept this fund with that one change?
We've already had a motion. We have a motion and a second. We need to vote on that.
Well, I thought that was to make that one change. I didn't know it was
Do
to
we-
accept the whole fund.
Okay, but we need to vote, we already have a motion on the floor, so we need to vote on
Oh,
that motion
okay.
first.
We have a motion on the floor to move $4,000 of the contingency that is now $8,225 to the cemetery trust fund, bringing it up to a much healthier point, to $13,900. Right now, it's at $9,900. Everybody in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
I still have the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I still have the question as far as what are the numbers for what we have to, for what this fund is supposed to be used? Trust that we just moved the money into, what do we need to make it its, to meet its goal? What is its objective? What is its?
Okay, and I do think that that's something that we should look into to see what is the accepted level of that trust for the size cemetery that we're doing.
And maybe find out in relation to that, how many plots we have left to sell, how much more income we have coming in on sales, so we can see how long we have revenue, potential revenue. I would think that would be a good idea. And Kevin has a question.
Kevin?
And also,
We're not going to approve that as we go.
how do we invest this money?
It's into the government pool.
As a trust that's, you know, an interest
It's in the
thing,
government.
we can't get a better investment vehicle? Like, since we can't use this money anyway, wouldn't a long-term, 5-year, 7-year certificate of deposit or something where we could make some better interest than, because the pool is, I mean, ridiculously low right now. This is a trust, and the whole purpose of this is to generate interest. You know, I believe this money needs to be invested in a manner that we can get the most interest we can out of it.
But you have to have so much to do a CD to get any rates, I don't know.
But is it just the state of Oregon that has an investment pool that goes into maybe a combination of mutual funds or stocks, bonds, et cetera, where it is a higher rate? they've been
Not that I'm
doing quite
aware of.
well.
Not that I'm aware of. We would have to take this money and go to a bank and invest it into a CD. As far as I know, the government pool, I don't know of any other state that you can invest in. I'm sorry, I don't know.
I don't think you can put it in something that would be a risk. I think you have to put it into a city.
Yeah, but there is some pledge.
Okay, let's get back to business, folks, and that is, are we voting to do that? You feel, Laura, we should wait to see? We should table this and wait to see?
I think we voted already.
Yeah, we already voted.
Okay.
I'm just gonna say no, just for the sake of scanning it again.
Okay, and so, we have 12 yes and 1 no. And we can move on to the museum trust fund.
I thought this motion was only talking about transferring funds.
Yeah, so now we have to go back and,
Okay, well, we're not going to approve it as a whole. We can take a consensus to approve it later, and that we're happy with it. But we're going to wait until the end to approve all the funds together in case one affects the other. So could I have a consensus to approve this fund with that one change? All those in favor?
wait,
Can I ask which fund you're approving?
yes, please.
We're not approving.
We're not approving,
I'm
we're
sorry.
having a consensus to accept it as it is for now.
Consensus that it's acceptable.
Just so you know,
And it is
Consensus that it's acceptable.
a consensus that is acceptable, exactly. And it's museum department.
No.
Cemetery, excuse me.
17.
Number 17.
17.
And 25?
And 25.
We're gonna do it separately or
And
together.
now we're going to do 25.
No, we haven't done either one yet. We have to do 17 and 25. We just did a transfer, that's all we did.
I just asked for a consensus to accept this. Would you state that, Kevin, how you stated it?
A consensus that we deem it as acceptable.
Okay.
Deem word acceptable. Fund 17
Fund 17 and
Fund
25.
17
and 25. All right, we're doing them both together.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, those are done, so we can move on to the museum department. And I guess I wanted to do that before. And we also have a museum trust fund. The museum department is on page 7, and the trust fund is on page 27.
So, 7 and 27.
So, and does the museum trust fund work the same way as, is that,
No, it does not.
so that can be spent for something, that they choose to spend it on, or that can be budgeted for something that they choose?
I'm gonna try to explain the museum trust fund as I know it. How this, all the expenses, okay. The museum trust fund, as I know it right now, is when the museum gets donations, they take donations as, you know, people come in and then they turn them into the city, we record them, and then we write a check right back to them. They have their own checking account that they buy their cleaners, anything that the museum needs, if they'd like to buy a display, you know, purchase a glass case for something, they buy that themselves. So that's what their donation money goes for. So we, in turn, return it to them for that purpose. That's why you see on page 27 out of the trust fund, donations coming in, and expenses going out, they equal the same amount of money.
Now, is that 2,500 budgeted in the museum department 7?
No, these are two separate funds, they don't commingle. The only thing that's in the trust are the donations that they bring in during their seasons.
They put in the box.
It's put in the box, we record them, and then we send them right back to them.
And the museum personnel, is that considered an employee of the city?
Yes, we have 3 employees at the museum. They work May through September, and that comes out of Fund 7 on page 7 for the museum.
Those are part-time positions?
They are part-time seasonal. They work an average of 5, they take their 3 staff members and they divide up their hours between the week, so they each get 5, 3 to, whatever they can do. But it is part-time seasonal. They are not benefited employees.
Is it the end of September or 15th?
I believe it's the end of September that they close.
And the 1st of May?
I believe so.
Are there any questions? Oh, Kevin?
Where's the revenue portion of this?
It's at Fund 1.
This is part of the general fund.
Okay.
That's what I was wondering too. Any other questions? Do I have a motion to, how do we phrase that again?
A consensus?
A consensus?
To
A
accept.
consensus to accept that, to accept this as it is?
This being the museum department and
museum department.
and the museum trust fund?
Department 7 and the museum trust
16.
fund,
16.
Fund 16.
I'll make that motion.
If
You
we're
don't
doing
need a
consensus,
motion.
you don't need
Oh, okay, I'll make a
Everybody in
consensus.
favor,
All right.
say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, that consensus is positive. And we're pretty much done with those. So the next one is the recreation department, page 8.
So we're gonna
And
add 2,000
here, I
here.
think we
Yeah,
need
we
to
need
add
them
the
to-
$2,000 to the revenues, don't we?
No.
The recreation program.
Marianne, the revenues that we dedicated towards recreation,
Correct.
those would be in the general fund to begin with.
That's
But
correct.
they need to be budgeted for here, is that correct?
That is correct. I'm gonna have to get with Karen to see where they want to allocate that extra $2,000. Because I honestly don't know what their plans are other than what is in the letter. So it'll be up to
should
them.
we table this fund until you've had an opportunity to do that?
I don't think we have to, do we?
Hmm?
I don't think we have to, as long as it'll be there, the 2,000 will be there.
You could,
It has to be budgeted.
you could approve it but figure out what line item to put it in later. I mean, you can approve
can
the
approve it.
fund numbers.
Yeah. Just write add 2,000.
Right.
To which line item?
Would this be an appropriate?
Materials and services?
um,
Then we can't spend it on wages.
We could create a contingency, which this fund doesn't have one.
Not in the general fund?
No, you cannot.
No? No, you can't do that, that's right.
You could temporarily put 1,000 into personal services, 1,000 into material and services, and then we'll talk to her, and you could adjust it at the end.
I would say 1,000 in special events. That's pretty generic.
And the other 1,000?
Travel and training.
Activity directors?
Yeah, recreation director to 2,500.
Okay.
That particular line item isn't just for one person, it's for all of the people that work in the department, is that right?
Well, there's activity directors right up above that.
The activity directors are employees that work year, I mean, they're all, the summer recreation director was Karen too. But the activity directors are Karen and Pam, who work year-round, a few hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays. The summer recreation director has been, in the past, somebody that has taken the summer and created the program and did the program, and they got an extra wage for that. And And I think that's where they would most likely want the money, but even if they use it part in activity directors, as long as that category doesn't go over, we're fine. So putting the 1,000 in recreation director is perfectly fine.
Okay, do I have a consensus that, that's a good place to put it? The summer recreational director increased from 1,500 to 2,500, and the special events increased from 115
Yep.
to 1,115. Darlene?
Well, it says here that they're talking about replacing flooring, buying new games.
Maybe the,
Should we put library? I
um,
don't know what to.
maybe we should put more into the materials and services part of it, as opposed to, you know,
Well, maybe the 500 to the summer director and the other 500 for other
I would-
materials and services.
Okay, 500 for the summer recreation director. And 500 where? To special events? Should we up that to,
We already
from
have.
115 to 615?
Here.
1,000?
I know, now they're changing their values.
Where are we putting it?
500, so far the suggestion is $500 added on to the summer recreation director, which was already 15, that would bring that up to a total of 2,000.
Right.
So change that
Say
to
an extra
500.
1,000 in special events.
We already have 1,000, now we have,
Flooring and all this and that.
George, do you have any ideas about this?
Marion,
The flooring that they're talking about in the meeting room would fall under the property designation in the property department. Now, it's not to say that Parks and Rec can't contribute to purchasing the flooring, but that is a property issue, not a Parks and Recreation issue.
Yeah, it doesn't show.
It doesn't fit that category.
Well, special events is pretty wide open, like Kevin says, so I think that's a good place for a portion of it.
As long as it's in material and services, we can move it between line items
Right.
later, as long as it's in there.
Lance?
500.
Well, I was just gonna say, they specifically mentioned games in their
Yeah.
notes, and then I was looking down at the games category, and
I
it
don't have
doesn't
any.
look like there's anything there.
They want to buy a Wii.
That's a game.
I know.
Yeah, there
That's
you
what they
go.
want for exercise for kids.
Okay, so far we have 1,000 in special events, added to special events, and that's pretty generic, they can use that for a lot of things. 500 added on to the summer recreation director. Would you like to put 250 into the games category? Or the whole
Just
500?
the whole
or-
500.
I think 500.
500, yeah.
Okay, 500. So the suggestion is now that there's been nothing budgeted for games, it looks like, for the last 3 years, so we're gonna keep that line item alive by budgeting $500 for it this year, $1,000 added on to the $115 for special events, and $500 added on to the summer recreation director for a total of $2,000 added onto that department. Do I have consensus to accept this as we've changed it?
Yes.
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 Yeah.
Anybody opposed? Okay, that's accepted. Okay, now grant fund, page 7.
No, pages 19 through 21.
I have the wrong page again, page 19 to 21.
Madam Chair, was that motion to accept just the changes or to accept the
To
fund?
accept the fund with
With the
those
changes.
changes.
Okay. trying to make the minutes right.
Yeah, I probably didn't state it all that well. Sorry.
That's okay.
Nineteen, we're at grants, fund 7. Yeah, grants.
19 through 21.
Is that what we're at, grants?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes,
Okay, and 21, okay.
it says 19.
Yep.
There's not much.
Wow, I don't know, there's an awful lot to look at there.
I know.
That'll be a good thing, right?
Yes, that's everything, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, this $1,000 has been carried for quite a long time for the Department of Land and Conservation and Development. Is that something that you normally do?
It's a grant that the state gives out to the cities, and we usually obviously accept it. It's a very small grant. It helps our planning. It's just something that they've done every other year. And so I put it in here. I'm not even sure that they're gonna offer it this year, but if it's not in there, you know, I just as soon it be in there in case we do get offered that 1,000. It's really a small amount.
When do we know that?
Well, I thought we would know by now, but I don't know how the state is, I don't know whether they're honoring those yet or not, I have no clue.
And that's the only grant that's been applied for in the city?
We don't even have to apply for it. It's a letter that comes from the state, and we can either accept it or deny it. We don't even apply for it.
And it has matching,
We don't have to do any matching with it. It's $1,000 that we
you
can
just either
use
get or you don't
on
get.
planning, and usually we have no problem spending it on planning.
Okay, thank you.
And we know that there's no other grants applied for?
There, to my knowledge, I have not heard of any other grants that have been applied for.
Do we have a consensus to accept this fund, the grant fund, Fund 7, as written? Everybody in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That's accepted. Okay, now the 9/11 fund. And that's on page 18. And that's fairly straightforward as well.
It's kind of a pass-through, isn't it?
Are there any
It's just a
questions
pass-through.
about this fund? It's just a pass-through?
Yes, we get funds from the state for 911. We receive them, and then Hood River County sends us a bill for the same amount that we received, and we send them a check. Just a pass-through.
Do I have consensus to accept this 911 Fund 6?
Yes.
Everybody in favor? Anybody opposed? Okay, that one's accepted too. So we have the Sewer Bond Fund, page 38. Now, this is just one portion of what we owe on the sewer, correct?
Yes, I'm sorry. Sleeping on it. We have two, I'll find the other one. It's 4 and 45.
Bond payment, and just the interest is on what?
Okay. I'm sorry?
I see under debt service bond payment, and it just, doesn't, it just says interest, no principal.
Right above.
Is it
Principal's
right
right
above
above.
right above?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, it's one and the same, okay.
We have
That
two,
might have been another.
just so that you know, we have two loans for the sewer fund. You have the sewer bond fund, which is what we're talking about, and then you have the OEDD loan payment fund, on page 45, which is not part of tonight's agenda, but could be if you would like to.
What page is it?
45.
Page 45.
It's Fund 45, page 45.
Page 45, Fund 45.
Miriam, why does it say reserve, and $80,000?
Yeah.
We are obligated by the bond to keep one payment in reserve. So what we have been doing is actually keeping a little bit more than one payment in reserve, so that, you know, when we get down to the final, we can pay it off.
And so the 53,000 is the actual
That is the
amount
actual
of the
payment, yes. And we are required by law to keep at least one payment in reserve. That's, I believe, that I read in the bond.
Marianne, wouldn't it benefit us to just pay that one payment ahead? Would that be the same?
You have to be very careful on the bonds, whether they charge you a penalty for paying.
Or further down?
Mhm.
Do you know if that has that?
No, I haven't, I don't. We are actually trying to pay off the fund, the OEDD loan first, because that can be paid off in advance, and I believe it's a higher interest rate than the bond fund. So it's beneficial if you pay the other one off quicker, and that's what we've been working towards.
So on that one, you've been paying, I mean, you talked about paying more than the normal payment on one of these loans. Are we paid more than the normal payment on that one?
We did in 09-10, we paid an extra amount, an extra $76,000, which lowered our payments and is getting us closer to paying it off, yes. This year I did not, I budgeted an additional loan payment of $20,000, but I will tell you that if I don't request that, if I don't call them and ask them or tell them that we're gonna pay an additional payment in advance, and I'm talking 2 months in advance, then we can't do it. They're very strict about that, and we found that out one year, so, I have budgeted it, but again, it all depends on the SDC funds.
And you have to specify that comes off the principal, do they apply that? to
No, they
everything?
apply it to the whole thing.
Principal and interest, just comes off.
Oh,
the
excuse me, I believe I said principal, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I believe when I did the 76,000, I said principal, yes.
Yes, that helps.
Is it legal to transfer from this sewer bond fund, 20,000 from there to have an extra payment on that?
I'm transferring from the sewer, the SDC fund, not the bond fund.
Can we take from that
The-
80,000 beginning balance?
No.
To leave the extra payment of
No.
53,000?
No, you can't transfer from the debt service fund into another debt service fund, you can't do that. But I can transfer SDCs, or from the SDC sewer fund to pay the loan, and that's what I've recommended we do, should we get some more SDCs from the sewer.
Well, it does seem to me that the beginning balance and how much you're transferring to begin with, and which is the beginning balance, I assume, is about $20,000 higher than it needs to be, because to keep one payment in reserve is $53,000, and we have $80,300. So, I would think logically that we wouldn't need that high of a beginning balance, which would mean,
The beginning balance is because are gonna have leftover money this year. Now, if you so choose
so
to
you
say,
could transfer less from the sewer fund.
you could, if the budget committee chooses to transfer less from the sewer fund, and, you could do that.
Well, we need to be creative, because this comes, I mean, particularly with the sewer fund, because we're so far behind on that debt. It was a very large sewer, and we're not paying the debt at the rate we need to be. And it would be my suggestion that we transfer $20,000 less to service this, and we would still have in excess of the amount we need to have in reserve. Are there any comments on that?
Well, and you want that.
And then transfer 20,000 more into Fund 45, Department 5.
Exactly.
Can we do
And
that?
it goes
I
to
don't,
principal.
Well, you would transfer less. It says transfer from sewer fund, so instead of transferring 53,711, you would only transfer 33,711. And that would reduce our reserve by $20,000, but we would still have $60,300 in our reserve.
So let me restate that if I can, Madam Chair. So the in Fund 40, the transfer from the sewer fund would be 33,711, not 53,711.
Exactly.
And then the transfer to Fund 45 from sewer would be not 20,000, but would be 40,000.
No.
No?
With one line up, transfer from sewer fund
Oh, okay, all right. So
would
it,
be 32,711 as opposed to 11,000, or 32,757.
Thirty-one,
well, it has to be,
31.
no, it has to be a transfer from the sewer fund, so it would be 11,757 to 31,757.
Yeah.
31, right?
Okay, I do have a question.
So 31,757.
Question, Tiffany?
Have we checked into seeing if we can lower the interest on these?
Not yet.
Okay, would that be something we
Yes.
would? Okay.
Well, I've made a suggestion. Does anybody else have another suggestion, guidance?
Tom, this is it.
Tom, I'm sorry.
Just for clarification for myself here. So we're, the one fund, we can't mess around with without two months' notice. So we're taking some money from that fund, from its beginning balance, right? And eventually it's getting into 45 that we can put extra money into
Is
this
what-
without being a problem.
Well, is what's happening on
So we're speeding up the
38?
payment of 45.
Yes.
Right.
Speed up to 45, using 40,
Right.
because we can't speed up 40.
Yeah, we're beefing up one fund and not allowing an excess of reserve in
Okay,
another.
and that's, okay.
Kevin?
So, we addressed the revenue part of it, but the expense part of the $20,000 that we transferred into Fund 45 would be,
Are we transferring it in, or are we just not transferring it out?
we're transferring it into 45.
We have to transfer it in,
We're transferring it into 45.
so
Okay.
we
But
put it,
we have to have a matching expense as well, otherwise it'll just sit there.
so
So in-
toward the additional
It'd
loan
just be
payment?
additional loan payment.
Right.
Okay, so,
But don't we have to take 20,000 out of the Fund 40, out of reserve?
Yeah, you're gonna drop this.
Yeah.
So in
This
Fund
down
40,
to
in terms of expense, we'll take 20,000 out of the reserve and make it 60.
well, we're just not transferring,
But we're not,
we're not
We're not-
taking the money out of Fund 40.
right.
We're transferring less money into Fund 40 from the sewer revenues,
But,
and those monies are going into 45.
but if the revenue is reduced by 20,000, the expense has to
Expense
reduce
has to
by
be reduced by
20,000.
20,000.
So it has to come out of someplace.
Now, the revenues in the department we're working on, correct?
The revenue's in number 40, correct?
Right.
Right.
Under line 2, under revenues. And that goes to 33,711, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
But then we have to, before you leave
Well,
Fund
we are,
40,
we're reducing the reserve by $20,000.
Correct.
that would do it.
That's what the whole thing was about.
By $20,000,
Right.
So where does it, where does
so it'll make it
20 go here?
60,300.
Just principal? We're
Lance?
gonna have 20
Yeah,
principal.
I just wanted to ask you a question, just to clarify.
So
Go
that's
back
not
and
40?
answer.
And I'm pretty clear on what you're attempting to do with Fund 40, the fund that's on the agenda for tonight. On Fund 45, which is a loan repayment rather than a bond fund, you're talking about adding an additional transfer from the sewer fund to the revenue side, and then making an additional payment to the expense side
Right.
Yes.
of Fund 45.
I probably would.
Or were you,
because I got lost in that part about the SDCs. I thought, the first time I heard you say it, I thought you were saying to preserve those, SDC funds and not expend those.
I don't think that I mentioned the SDC fund in
So
conjunction
you're
with
not,
this.
so the goal here is to increase our payment on our OED loan.
I personally would rather see it go into a contingency fund of the sewer fund.
Rather than going into.
Rather than make an extra payment at this time. Because our sewer fund is not looking real great, it's losing ground, and I think that, and no contingencies have been budgeted. Unless we can find them somewhere else, this is a possibility. But those are two suggestions. Could I have comments on that suggestion?
The second one about not moving it into 45.
Well, my original idea, but somebody expounded on another idea, which might be a better way to go. But my original idea was not to expend the money from the sewer fund, but to apply that $20,000 to a possible contingency. Laura?
And I think we were discussing that because we determined that this only has to be large enough for one payment, and so that's where your brain was, my
Exactly, is that we could create a contingency.
Towards a payment or a fund or.
Right, another payment or a
Because
contingency.
we're overestimating.
So-
But
Money
after
was taken
attending the
this
meetings there, I became very convinced personally that
Yeah,
the
that's
contingencies are important.
So you're suggesting that the money not move to
Not move.
45, that it stays in, the 20,000 stays in the
That
sewer
would
fund,
be my,
in contingency?
and so we have two different ideas on the table here. And
Where's the sewer fund?
one of them is Kevin?
I kind of disagree with the contingency, leaving it a contingency. If we let it set there, we're going to get a 0.5% interest over the course of a year, or whatever the intergovernmental, I don't know what it is. But in the same time, we're gonna be paying, what, 7.5% on
That's
the
true.
money that we owe.
Very true.
It's not like if we had an emergency, we couldn't get access to
So,
funds, right?
Okay.
So to let it sit there, I think, it's costing us money to
Even
let
so,
it
if
sit
you
there.
don't
Okay.
That would be my opinion.
Darlene?
I would agree with what Kevin said. And then it says here, we have a sewer contingency of $17,539, is that correct?
I haven't,
Is that on page 36?
That is correct. That's correct.
36, so we have,
so there is a contingency there.
What page is that again?
page 36.
this is sewer fund, Fund 31.
Very good. Okay. So, now the consensus would be to, Kevin, would you mind stating that, because, okay, Laura?
And so, my question is, this $20,000 then, Mary Ann, I believe, said we're trying to pay off the OEDD because we know we can pay it off and it has the highest that we owe for. We owe the most on it.
Well, no, actually, you
Highest interest,
Highest interest.
that's correct.
So, I like that.
And you can make a principal payment on that,
Yes, that's.
Lance?
Just a question for Mary Ann. Could you walk us through the recommendation I think you're making to use the sewer SDC funds to make that additional payment?
Correct.
I think you touched on it briefly before.
Correct.
I wonder if you walk us through that.
If we get sewer SDCs, then we would utilize $20,000 from the SDC fund to make the additional payment of the $20,000 that is budgeted. If we don't get SDCs to cover that, then that payment will not occur. So now you're saying you'd like 40,000 in there, so the 20,000 would, your extra 20,000 would occur, but the other 20 that's SDC fund might not.
So the reason why it's 20,000 is just, is to say, well, maybe we'll get
Yes.
development moving in that would pay for They would bump up the sewer
Right.
SDC funds, but there's no guarantee.
There's no
that's-
guarantee.
Okay.
No.
But if it does.
But if
we've
that
got
does,
it
it's
there,
budgeted
then
and
we're
I can
planning
go
for
ahead
that.
and
So
make that
that's,
payment.
even though it looks like there's an additional 30,000 for Fund 45, it's not there.
Correct, only if the SDCs come in will it be there.
Thank you.
It's air money.
Phantom
So
money.
it's contingent upon, and then if we do get it, though, contingent upon, we will make additional payments. It's guaranteed to make,
If the
it won't go
SDC
anywhere else.
No, the SDC funds for sewer can only be used for debt service. That is the rule. So if I don't get SDC funds by, say, October, then that will not occur, because I have to get a hold of the loan company to say, we want to put an additional payment on this.
But if we do it now during budget, you'll have to be able to.
I will be able to do that if the SDC funds come in, yes.
And if they don't, we still have
We still have
$20,000
$20,000.
Yeah, I'm
applied
saying
to the
with this
principal.
first additional
Yes.
20,000.
I can still put a $20,000.
And that will straight go in as we decided
Yeah.
to cancel too.
That's it.
Well, just on, the way it's written here in the worksheet, if we just changed additional loan payment, $20,000 SDC fund to $40,000, wouldn't that get confusing? Because we would be expecting $40,000 of SDC money. Shouldn't there be a separate line item or this added to the loan payment principal amount?
You could just increase it to 40, don't even
But it
touch
does
the
say
SDC now.
SDC on it.
Kevin, if I may, the note that's behind additional loan payment is so that I know where those funds are coming from and you know where those funds are coming
And
from.
that's what I'm saying is it would be
So I'm not
confusing.
changing that I'm not gonna change that $20,000 amount that's behind there.
We can just
Okay.
put proposed.
Well, that was, I think someone had said to change that to $40,000, that particular item.
I'm
And I
gonna
was saying that
change-
would be confusing, because if we change additional loan payment at 20,000 SDC,
It sounds like it's all coming out of it.
Well, not if you just
No.
leave the 20,000 there for the SDC. Yeah.
You just leave the $20,000 behind there as a little comment, but on the proposed budget where it says 20, we'll make that 40. Now, I can add another notation there saying that
If,
that 20,000 from SDC and 20,000 from sewer.
Yeah.
I do not recommend you add another additional line item,
okay,
because I have to keep that on the books for 3 years,
okay.
if it's not used.
Well, here's the thing, loan payment principal, we wouldn't be paying any more interest
Right, no.
if we changed that to $38,755 of principal. You wouldn't have any extra line items. The money would be accounted for, and there wouldn't be any confusion about whether we need 40,000 from SDC or whatever.
But that reflects just what the principal that's due, as opposed to we want to make an additional loan payment of
Our interest isn't gonna
$20,000.
ch- Our interest expense isn't gonna change.
I understand that, but she has it set up here so that this reflects what our principal is due for this year, because we don't have $38,000 that's due this year for the principal. We only have $18,000 and $755.
It's
So-
stating the obligation.
Yeah, that's,
The obligated principal and interest.
And it follows the amortization schedule,
Right.
and that's what our auditors look for.
so it's just a bookkeeping.
I think her idea is putting two notes, one says 20,000 SDC fund, one says
agree with that.
20,000 sewer fund, and increasing it to 40, that they add up and it makes sense.
I agree with
Okay. So the way we're doing it designates it for an interest payment, correct?
A principal
A
payment.
principal
Principal.
payment.
Yes.
Lance?
Okay, so, just for a second, back to the discussion between the Sandra's second idea, transfer from the sewer fund into contingency for the sewer fund versus what Kevin has recommended now, transfer from the sewer fund into an additional payment on Fund 45. A question for Mary Ann. One of the recommendations about our budget that we got from the auditor was that we look at beginning fund balance. It's getting a little small, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So, for example, and I hear what Kevin's saying about, you put it in contingency, you make 0.25% interest or something, some ridiculously low amount, versus a loan that's out there costing you 7%,
4.25.
It's 4.25, so it's not 7?
It's not 7%.
So the difference between the government pool, which
4.25
is less than 1,
4.75.
if I understand correctly, and the loan interest, which is 4.25. So I'm trying to balance that concept of, you wouldn't wanna be paying extra interest that you don't have to, if all you're gonna do otherwise is hold on to money that's not gonna be making much interest, against the auditor's recommendation that we look at beginning fund balance. So my question for you is, let's say we were to go with Sanders' recommendation and transfer that money straight to contingency and then not use it, how would that impact our beginning fund balance?
That would roll over into your beginning fund balance for the
That would
next
be
year.
one way to increase
Yes.
the beginning fund balance and address the concern that the auditors raised about our
Correct.
financial.
Where did that 7,
I don't know where the 7 point,
yeah,
because
because
it's
that was just.
4.25.
That's, what's the bond, I think that's the bond.
Bond, I believe, is 4.75, or it's a variable.
Oh, okay, to go up.
I've seen the 7%
Did you?
in relation to one of those 2 loans at one time.
Does
Okay.
anybody else have some comments, Tom?
Well, I think the question on from the auditor on the getting balances didn't apply to, only applied to this fund. There were some departments that were having trouble, but I don't think that's the issue with, every fund has everything. So I don't think, as I recall, there wasn't, it didn't have to do with this fund here. Had to do with other funds.
Laura?
That issue.
I think we need to get a clear delineation or definition of what a contingency is versus what a savings fund is, you know, I mean, this contingency from this law book of ours, you know, keeps relating, do not use contingency as a savings.
Right, but it does revert to the beginning
That's
fund
correct.
balance.
Yes, it does.
If not used, which is one way, like they say, to beef up. And as Tom pointed out, this wasn't one of the funds that was called to attention by the auditor as having a particularly low. So I would like Kevin to state his idea as he said it, and we'll take a consensus on Kevin's idea.
Well, I just wanted to state that I think that there's a difference between a fund and a debt. And it's better to pay off a debt,
Exactly.
and we need to put more money toward that,
Exactly.
so.
And I want to mention real quick, the auditor's report says revenues for the sewer fund, revenues and expenditures have been fairly stable over the years. Fund balances have declined. Early debt payments have been transferred out. So that's what he actually said about the sewer fund.
So it doesn't look like we're looking that bad in the sewer fund. right?
Beginning balance in the sewer fund is probably about 25% of the entire fund, so that's pretty healthy.
That particular fund wasn't the one that was in.
Pay on the principal.
I think it was water and streets.
Street, water,
Kevin, would you state
Fire.
that proposal as well as you can, and I'll take a consensus on it? To reduce the beginning, to reduce the
Transfer from,
transfer from 53,711
In Fund
to,
40.
Tiffany,
well, in
please.
Fund 40, so they can clear it.
Okay, but I would appreciate it if you'd let me finish what I'm saying. That's, okay. The 53,000, to reduce the $53,711 transfer from the sewer fund 40, and we're doing Fund 40, as Tiffany pointed out, to 33,711, and to transfer that to, Kevin?
And to, also in Fund 40, to change the reserve from 80,300 to 60,000.
To 60,000.
And then to Fund 45, under transfer from sewer fund, to adjust that from 11,757 to 31,757. And
Are you getting this, Sherelle?
Fund
Okay.
45, additional loan payment, change that from 20,000 to 40,000.
everybody, and is that also to accept the fund with those changes?
Well, we
So
accept
there we
the
have
funds,
a consensus to, that both of those are acceptable with
I
those
beg your pardon,
changes.
Lance?
Well, now we're talking about two funds, so I just wanted to clarify.
No,
We're going to-
we're dealing with Fund 40 only,
Okay,
right
so
now.
we're not talking about accepting 45?
No.
Okay.
No.
No.
That's what I
We're just changing
understood.
45 for later.
You're,
Yes.
you're making the changes in 40 and in 45?
No,
That's,
we are making them to 45, but we're not dealing with 45 tonight. But that's where we're gonna go with it.
Well,
Kevin?
we can.
I think it was suggested that we address both of these at the same time since they're
Oh,
related.
okay.
I know it's not on the list, but I think when this topic came up, we just,
Can we do
Decided
that
to
without,
add.
the agenda being printed as it was? Is it acceptable to add a fund? Okay,
I would think so.
okay, and that would be the fund that we're talking about right
45.
now?
Fund 45.
45.
yeah, OEDD loan repayment fund, fund 45.
And we'll make the footnote that you suggested.
So the suggestion right now is that, or the question, I guess, for consensus is that the changes to both of these funds are acceptable.
Well, that's a pretty simple fund. I don't know why we didn't pick that when we were choosing easy funds. That we accept both of them.
Lance has a question.
Lance?
Mary Ann, Mr. Person there, what does this do to the long-term status of the OEDD loan, the Fund 45?
It'll buy it down.
Can't do anything but improve
I just
it.
don't know how much.
Really?
Well, I don't know what
I'm trying to
I don't
get
know
the
what
big picture here.
the complete debt is, so I can't
It,
tell you.
it is scheduled, the amortization schedule, it is scheduled to be paid off in 2015, in 3 more years. So I'm guessing that might cut down a year. I mean, I'm not,
Looks like we're doubling up.
yeah,
A little more than doubling
exactly,
up.
because our payments are 24,000, so you are doubling up, you're adding an extra principal payment, because our principal is 18,000. You're adding an extra principal payment.
And if we got the SDCs, then that would cut it 2 years.
So I'm estimating that would cut it down by
And
1.
that's all I was asking, is just.
That's my estimate.
Okay, do I have a consensus to accept both these funds with those changes made? All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, the consensus is positive, and on to capital reserve fund. Geez, I think this is gonna be more of a discussion on this fund. And, the city administrator has a letter to read from
Page
one of our.
58,
I beg your pardon?
I just said it's page 58. Is it?
Page 58. I think, is anybody in favor of a 10-minute break right now?
Sure.
Before we tackle this last fund? Okay, 10-minute break, folks. discussing outside that, the transfers from all of these departments are hard to approve at this time, or even consider, until we've looked at the various budgets of these various departments. So I would like to table this fund until near the end. And that was recommended by the city administrator. Do you have anything to say, Rich, about that?
No, I think that holding that one off until you've gone through the other funds is probably a more logical approach.
And we really did better tonight than I thought we would do, and so we've gone through our list except for that one. But we do have a conversation that needs to take place about employee insurance. Rich?
I want to mention one thing. We had, Darlene gave us a letter. What I'd like to do is take this, have you kind of table this item, and I'll send it to the Department of Revenue at the state and ask for their response. That way I don't have to run up any bill with our attorney.
Why would it run up a bill with an attorney?
If our attorney, the city attorney,
Oh,
if I talk to them, it costs money, whereas if I talk to the Department of Revenue, it's already paid for out of our tax dollars.
is that okay with everybody?
Darlene?
Is that okay with you, Darlene?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll hold that off also until the next meeting for that?
Sure.
Okay, and Kevin?
I had a question before we get too far away from the capital reserve. Are these transfers into this capital reserve fund, are they tied to the individual fund that made the transfer? I mean, are they tracked? So,
Yes.
okay. So, how do we know, of the 950,000 beginning balance, which departments that 950,000 belongs to?
I manually track it and I have a list. Would you like me to share that list with you next week?
Yes. Would everybody like a copy of that list? I believe the consensus is yes, Mary Ann, that's not too much trouble. We appreciate it. It'll list,
It's like a running balance of how much capital reserve
each fund has.
each contributor has.
And I also have a question on that. How, if a fund is in the hole, how does it have capital reserve? I mean, if it's in,
It's a very good question.
okay.
Why it's tabled.
It was an oversight on my part when we did the, I'm supposed you're talking about the sewer, right?
Sewer and emergency services.
Okay, let me talk about sewer first.
Okay.
It was oversight on my part when we bought the blower upgrade for the sewer back in, I believe it was '08. When they purchased the sewer, when they purchased the blower upgrade, there was confusion of timing, and I had transferred the money out, and we didn't get the blower upgrade until next year, for the blower itself. I believe, and I've been wanting to go back and check this, I believe that's what allowed us to make such a big payment on our bond, or on our OEDD loan, because it was transferred out once, and then I paid it out of capital reserve. It never got back in. And that was oversight on my part, but I did want to investigate that to make sure I was correct in that error. As far as the EMS fund,
That's a payment, isn't it?
you'll see it go in, you'll see it go out of the electric fund into the EMS fund. It is the way that Access works. This is in an Access program. It's the way that Access works, so it is somewhat deceiving. I have to show that loan on the capital reserve. It is also in our balance sheet as a loan out to EMS. It's a paper thing. Yes, the EMS has a $450,000 loan to electrical. So basically, as you see on, did I give you a sheet for capital reserve? Tiffany, you were looking at something and I didn't know.
Well, I'm just looking at the budget sheet right now, but
Okay, this,
There was a separate sheet.
this will become more evident when I give you that document that I'm talking about, please. And I think we can talk more.
Because all of this money, these transfers are not savings. Some of these are to service loans, et cetera, right? Now, for the transfer from emergency services is to service the interest on a loan. That's not to save in the
No.
capital reserve.
Capital reserve is a saving. It is not to service debt. Be-
Then what is the $12,000 doing?
I can tell you.
Okay, Kevin.
The chief was directed to make a capital reserve transfer every year, and this revolves around replacing bunker gear. And we had to replace all of it in one budget cycle at one time, and so he was directed to make a capital transfer every year to save up for replacing it the next time it needs to be replaced.
Is that what it is, Mary Ann, or is it for the interest on the $450,000?
It's the interest on the $450,000. I had to go over here and find it. I'm sorry.
No, he was directed to make a capital reserve.
But that's not, that is not here. I don't
The
see
bunker
that.
gear was a grant.
No,
Part of it was.
to replace, this is replacing it in the future when it needs to be replaced.
Oh, I see.
I think, Tom, with you,
I understand.
And so he was directed to make payments to the capital reserve for bunker gear replacement. But that is not this $12,710. This
No,
is
you-
an interest to
you
the
are
capital
you are
reserve
actually
for
correct.
the $450,000.
You are correct, is to pay for that $450,000.
but I thought we didn't
Just-
do payments out of,
Well, I misspoke, I'm sorry, Kevin.
Is that
I
what we're
misspoke.
hearing?
Somehow I have to pay capital reserve back for what they loan to the EMS fund. And so I'm transferring the interest payment to the EMS, to the capital reserve to be put into the electrical fund to help pay back the $450,000.
The electric part of the capital reserve.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Tiffany?
And what about the fire engine interest? Is there no interest reflected on, for
I
that?
was directed by Rich to just put the interest only in there
For the,
for both the,
That's the total interest. for
this
the
is the
one
total,
loan.
okay, because you're
fire
just,
engine and,
Okay.
the interfund,
all right, thank you,
the other one.
sorry.
Madam Chair.
Kevin?
I guess we're kind of getting into a discussion. on
That's
this,
okay, I think
but
it's good. We'll get a head start on it.
Why isn't this shown as a expense out of emergency services as opposed to, it appears like it's a capital expenditure, right? Or a capital reserve expenditure for future use.
Instead of debt service.
Why isn't it just shown as an expense in Fund 5, interest?
It still has to show up somewhere in the capital reserve fund because they're the ones that are receiving the interest.
You could transfer it as an expense out of Fund 5's expenses directly
Directly to-
into where it belongs, the electrical department's capital reserve.
Well, that's what this is,
And
isn't it?
that's what I'm doing.
That's what this is. This is a capital reserve for all of our funds. I may be
Okay,
misunderstanding.
so this is looking to me like it's a capital reserve
yeah.
item out of
It's a revenue.
emergency services, right? Or does it show as an expense, as interest expense in emergency services in
I
Fund
think
5?
if we listed it as emergency services interest payment, that would solve the problem.
I'll be more than happy to change the
Yeah.
title of the line description. if
That would be good, because that's better describes the activity, actually. And then it's self-explanatory. I did have one question about this fund, and that, it says sale of the firehouse. Why would that be put into the capital reserve fund? Why would that be budgeted in that spot?
Tell me where
I
you're at.
understand it needs to be budgeted somewhere, but not that amount. I have with me right now, I received it from Chuck Daughtry today, a appraisal for the firehouse property that's 2 years old, so it's still a good appraisal. And if anybody would like a copy of that, I have that available.
What was it?
It's $214,000.
214?
Uh-huh. And so if we're going to budget for that, for the sale of the firehouse, which we have to do, because it is, and anything that's anticipated, you must budget for. And this is something that may not happen, but if it does happen, and if it's not anticipated, you can't do a supplemental budget to spend this money. So it'll have to be designated when we do this budget, where that sale money will go. And here, it just lists sale of firehouse as a revenue, and it goes into the revenue fund, and I don't see that as being proper. I would like to see that listed somewhere else when it's sold.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
The $450,000 that was loaned to the EMS came out of capital reserve. It is only right that the sale of the fire hall, because that is where the money was supposed to come from to reimburse the light fund, goes back into capital reserve. The reason I booked it for $450, and you're more than welcome to change it, is because that is how much the loan is. Okay, it's easy tracking. Also, like you said, that if we receive more money for the fire hall than what you budget, then that money cannot be spent unless you do a supplemental budget. Supplemental budgets do cost. It costs to advertise, it costs time and materials. It is a lot simpler if you make that more than what the appraisal value is.
I don't want to, get into a prolonged discussion on this, but we totally intend to service the debt of the fire hall in its totality. And if this fire hall, the old fire hall, is to sell, we will designate that money to be paid to the principal of this loan, and it will certainly give us relief. But I don't see budgeting an unrealistic amount. It has to be a realistic amount. We have an appraisal, $450,000 is not going to be realized out of the sale of the firehouse. I think we all know that, and I don't think this is a reasonable estimate, and we're legally obligated to make this a legal estimate. So if it should go through here or be budgeted through this department, that might be understandable. But we will be budgeting for this debt, yes.
I think what Marion is saying is, if you want to make it a more reasonable estimate, that's fine. Make it a slightly higher, more reasonable estimate so that we don't have to do a supplemental. So if it was appraised at, you said 214, then, maybe put it in at 250. Just make sure we don't lowball it.
Right.
And so what you're saying is that we have a loan out for $450, and so we have to balance that on the budget side with $450, and that's what we've done here.
That's what I've done.
And what we could do then is just cut it into two to make her request, $250 for the sale of it and $200 for wheels, whatever you want to entitle that. Wouldn't that take care of it? It's just an example.
How do we do it?
Can we poll the committee to see how many people favor changing or leaving it as it is? 'Cause I personally, I don't have any problem with it being the 450. I think we're not planning on spending that money, so we're not budgeting to get that revenue and spend it on something else.
No.
Right? So I don't really see any real harm.
Well, you're the chair now, so you should poll.
That's what I was trying to do, but I was giving my opinion too. So,
And I would just repeat repeat what she said, is that it doesn't clarify it. It doesn't really, it's not transparent in saying what's going on. It's not saying there's a debt here, it's just saying, we're gonna sell this
I don't
and
know.
get $450.
So you're saying that you would rather change it? Okay,
I mean,
and
that's why
Darlene?
it's there, is poorly.
I think it'd probably be easier for Mary Ann to track to keep it at the 450.
Guida?
Realistically though, I feel the appraisal was, the 450 was not true, so I'd rather go for the more realistic, 250.
Okay,
I would leave them as is.
okay, Tom?
I leave it as it is, because that's what we borrowed, I mean, that's real.
Lance?
Well, the appraisal was done before the property was divided, and there's been some, an offer and stuff, so things have changed since that appraisal, but I agree that, for tracking purposes alone, that's a good enough argument for me to keep it as is.
To me, it's immaterial, but pretty soon we're gonna have to get it straightened out. It has to be paid.
I agree.
I think it's almost immaterial what that number is. It'd be
Leave
a million, it doesn't matter.
Leave it.
Okay, so the consensus is to leave it at the 450.
But we still have to deal with
Well-
not being a fact.
But you see what,
No,
the
I
point is
I
that
understand.
if we were budgeting to spend part of that 450,000, right, projected revenue, I would have a different approach on it as well. But it's actually a wash. Whatever we're gonna get out of it is what we're gonna get out of it.
And it could be lower.
Yeah.
Then 450?
Oh, for, no.
Yeah, I think everyone agreed that we're not going to get
Yeah.
450
Right
probably,
on.
but
Budgeted.
we're not budgeted.
It doesn't hurt to reflect it as a
We have any of those
proposal
left?
sale, that price. I just think it'd be better if we
Budget
had
is a
a realistic figure.
I do too, but I think it also kind of revolves around the idea of the debt back and forth.
Leave that to
I
where it is, so
believe it's simple,
they're gonna
but
figure out
I keep coming
the
back.
consensus was
where the money comes from.
to leave it.
Okay, you took the vote?
I just, asked.
Okay, well, my vote would have been no. And my vote would have been no because, it makes it very clear throughout budget law that it has to be a realistic expectation of the revenues you expect to receive, and I don't believe $450,000 is realistic for the sale of the fire hall. And so I believe that that's not a proper thing to do. But if that is the consensus, we'll just leave that alone for now.
Now, I noticed that there, where are we? Oh, the fire truck and what else is left in there, I see there's nothing budgeted for that. For the truck that,
And, well, that is something I did bring up to Rich when we met the other day, and that's that,
surplus.
I don't see a part in here, and maybe Mary Ann can correct us, where the sale of the modular or the sale of the yellow fire truck has been reflected.
That is correct.
And those are both, things that we can reasonably expect to be sold.
Well, we could put a value on it and put them in there.
Okay. I don't know where you wanna put them, but
Did we ever get a value for the trailer?
They should go to,
I think we're gonna.
No, it's on my to-do list.
it's being,
well, the fire truck, oh, that's right, the big fire truck. You don't, the yellow fire truck, you don't think that that should go to the, who loaned the money for the fire truck? There was a
General fund.
the general fund?
I thought it was the water.
There's a,
The water?
We loaned them 5,000 out of, our capital reserve transfer, and we loaned them another 17,000 out of beginning fund balance.
Then why does it say if loaned from water?
That was the 24,000,
Which was for?
which was for the fire truck,
Well,
but we
there you
also
go.
loaned them 10,000 and 17,000.
Well,
Then where is that reflected on here?
17.
Because that was a resolution, and there was no repayment for that
Okay, then
That
that's not a
transfer.
loan, that's.
No, it was a transfer, there was no repayment.
I would like to
For
point
that.
out that it's not legal to make a resolution without budgeting for repayment.
If it's
But this
a
was,
loan, this was just a transfer,
yeah,
not a
it
loan.
wasn't a loan.
It was not a loan, it was a transfer.
From the water department?
No.
From the
that's
general
two
fund.
separate things.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm talking about the water department.
Okay, you'd asked about the 10,000.
Okay, but that hasn't been scheduled to be repaid either, the
No.
24. And at the time that resolution was made, it should have been scheduled for repayment, to have that be correct. And I would like to draw attention to this, now that we're talking about this, and this is kind of a discussion I guess we were gonna save for next week, Kevin?
Madam Chair, could we, before we get into a discussion, schedule the
Next week?
agenda for the next meeting?
Okay, do you have any suggestions? I think that we should, I think that one thing that should definitely be on the agenda is to discuss the debt. Discuss all of our debt and where that's being paid for and where we can look for that for. Can we do any suggestions how we can accomplish that?
On
Debt service?
addressing the debt?
Mhm. I mean, we have to know what we're dealing with, and where we're going to look for it in order to service that debt. And so the funds that we should be looking at now probably are the funds that we, like administration, Fund 1. Is that something that we should tackle next time? Because it affects, like the level of insurance, et cetera, and the level of employment affects basically every other fund that's left.
Well, I see two things connected with the debt service, and that's, we need to decide how long we're gonna take to pay it back.
Right. What's legally,
You know, we don't know that, I don't know that. I don't know whether we have 2 years to pay it back, whether we have 5 years to pay it back, whether we're gonna go out and get a loan.
well, I think
Where we
these are the things that
I mean, I don't know. But that's the first
the
step,
first step, I
is
think,
to
also.
determine the
What-
period of time we're gonna pay it back over. And then that's gonna give us the amount that we're gonna need to come up with.
I think this is something we're gonna have to know pretty quick.
Really, I think so too. And in order to determine that, we're going to have to know what's legally permissible as far as the Department of Revenue goes. Darlene,
Isn't that what we did? We did a consensus for Rich to check into that.
you did
I thought we
when
did
I was
at the
gone.
last meeting.
No,
Just
tonight.
tonight, with the letter that I wrote, I recommended that we have a consensus so that Rich can contact the Department of Revenue and if they can help us.
But I don't
Make
think that should
recommendations.
wait, and so if that's in Darlene's letter, you know, I think that that's something we need to discuss tonight, because we need that information at next meeting, I would imagine. We need to know what the acceptable ways of budgeting that debt are, if we're able to extend the resolution for 5 years and budget it for 7. Yeah, Rich?
What I'll try to do for the next meeting is identify all outstanding loans and what the terms are as they are now, and I mean where the money came from, what the terms are, and what the possibilities are of either refinancing, extending, et cetera.
Kind of a
I'll
repayment.
try to
Consolidation.
Right.
consult whatever the options are.
Darlene?
We'll also probably want to see the receipts on that 450,000 expenditures to know, before we budget for that loan, to know that that money was spent for that purpose.
That's an issue with me too. We've never, actually what happened here is a series of illegal transfers were made, and then Fund 55 was dissolved and Fund 56 was created in order to allow a transfer to cover the whole ball of wax. And I believe all of this needs to come out, and we need to make sure that all of that spending was authorized spending. It needs to be defined, because now we're asking to pay for it, and it's not gonna be a simple process. Rich?
Well, they are two separate items. I'll try to do both of them, but I mean, one, I need to go through and look at all the debt service we have by loan, by terms, by possibilities, and there's extension, consolidation, refi, whatever. Then there's a separate issue, which is the firehouse, what expenditures went against the firehouse, and I'll try to.
Exactly. What does this $450,000 comprise of?
I'll try to pull that together.
That would be really good. Is there a consensus of the committee that we'd like to have that? Everybody in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed?
Aye.
I don't know that I need that for this budget.
Okay, thank you, noted.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
Kind of on the same deal. The $13,587.25 that's due the System Development Fund. We talked at the last meeting about the money that was used, and then part of the resolution was that it was to be budgeted as an expense for the following year.
I'm sorry, I'm not tracking.
Okay. Resolution 1059 from 2004, 2005.
Okay. And what?
And the
What's the
committee
discussion?
took consensus last meeting
We did.
that was
There's a
to be
balance
paid
due,
for.
yeah, there's a balance due of 13,587.25. And, it's basically another loan.
And that
I
needs
would
to
like
be
to be
paid
treated the
back.
same way.
That was an operating transfer. And when you take a loan for an operating expense, legally, you only have that year or the next year to pay for it. For a capital project, you have up to 10 years now. It used to be 5. But this was, I don't know if that would be considered a capital project or what, but the resolution clearly stated that it was to be paid for after a certain amount of time, and the committee took consensus that we were going to do that this year. So that needs to be included in that list.
Yeah, it's,
And I'm wondering if you would accept suggestions from the committee, and I'm not saying that this would be the best way to do it, but one of the possibilities that I thought of in budgeting this, paying for this debt in a timely way, would be the possibility of, since we have a good appraisal, we wouldn't have to go out and spend more money on another appraisal. It is recent enough, and probably the same man could do an update. I really don't think values have increased in the last 2 years, just a second, Tom. And I think that we could take a mortgage out on that fire hall for part of this. And then when the fire hall sells, the mortgage would in essence go away. That way, we wouldn't be budgeting it all together, but we would be budgeting in 2. One of them would be for the repayment of the mortgage, the other one would be for the repayment of the balance of the $450,000. So when the firehouse sold, we wouldn't have to redo the payment schedule for the loan to repay the entire debt. It's just an idea. I don't know if anybody has any comments about it. Tom?
We have to do the interest.
I'm not sure what we have seen the report you have there, but I believe that may have been figured out when it was one piece of property. We have since split it into 2 pieces of property.
That
So
could
I
have an
don't know if
impact.
I don't know if it would apply or if it needs to be tweaked a little bit for that, because there's 2 pieces of property.
So it was 2 separate pieces of property, but the 2 pieces of
there was
property?
one.
They divided it.
Okay.
There was one, and they may have appraised, I believe that appraisal may have been on the one big piece of property. We have since split it into 2 pieces.
No, I think it was divided at the time that this appraisal was made.
I don't know.
It was two separate tax
It was
lots, but there
two
was one
separate
really
tax-
funky tiny one that they did away with. and
Uh-huh.
Now there's two pretty much equal sized lots.
Okay, so you're right, it maybe would need to be tweaked. Darlene?
The sale of that fire hall property, does that not include the
No,
Overlook
next
Park
council
then?
meeting.
Because if that
Council
Overlook
thing.
Park sells, don't we have to pay back the forestry department $70?
Yes, there are expenses, there, and that's why the anticipated revenues on here are way out of line. I mean, there will be realtors' expenses, closing expenses, there'll be expenses. And even best case scenario, we would have never realized anywhere close to $450,000.
Madam
George?
Chair, I'd just like to throw out my opinion on the firehouse, is, right now, in all truthfulness, the sale of the firehouse would bring in minimal amount of money. The economy being what it is right now, is terrible. There's still possible things that we might be able to do as far as leasing it and doing other things to bring revenue in. I don't honestly believe that, at least in my opinion, that the sale of the firehouse is gonna really do that much to solve our problem, okay? I think that we as the committee should come up with an equitable repayment plan and stick to that, and I think that we should continue to own that piece of property. And then if the possibility comes up that we can lease that property out, that we should do that, because I think a little later on down the road, that piece of property might actually increase in value. So I don't think we should get really tied up with the fact that we're gonna try to sell it, because I really don't think it's a viable option. I think it's a better option for the city to keep that and keep the possible usage and the possible ability to make more money from it.
I don't disagree with that, but I think there are advantages of taking out a mortgage. For one thing, the most time we're going to be able to do to spread this out, this is a large amount of money, is probably 7 years. We've already gone 3, and we could probably get it to a total of 10. And this is just, I'm only assuming this, I'm not sure we'll even be able to do this with the Department of Revenue. And by taking out a mortgage on at least part of that, you would be able to spread that out over a longer term, at least half of it.
The only thought with what you're saying is if you look at us taking out another mortgage, now we have 2 compounding interest that we're paying, okay? So you'd be paying on the interest on the mortgage on the new loan, plus we're still paying on the interest on the existing loan. So right now, because it's an intergovernment loan, what is the interest that we have to pay back on that?
Based on the government pool.
And that's 0.5%. It's only 0.5%. So there's no way that we're gonna get money from another entity for 0.5%. So we're better off to keep it the way it is. Plus, the other thing is, according to the ordinance, if you read the ordinance on that particular, if we sell the fire hall, we are to, the resolution, thank you. That if we sell the fire hall, that we have to pay off that loan in its entirety when we sell the fire hall.
The resolution says it has to be paid off in its entirety in 5 years, and that obviously isn't gonna happen. So, unless we're gonna pay attention to all of the resolution, I can't see picking out one part of it and saying this part matters, but the other part doesn't. So I think the thing for us to do at this point is determine with the Department of Revenue what our legal course is, and then we can go from there.
I agree with that.
Okay.
But I just wanted to give you my opinion about the actual sale.
I appreciate it, and I have a tendency to agree. It's, we may have to change our mind when we go to try to budget all this money if we can't find the money to pay it. But I feel like you do. I think that it's best that we pay this at the lowest interest, at the fastest way possible. But I know we can't pay it in 2 years, which is what the resolution says. Kevin?
As far as the items for the agenda for the following meeting, I was looking maybe we could do all of the public works, so we can have those people available for that meeting and get all those out of the way at the same time, which should be Fund 21. Fund 31,
31 or 20?
both.
Oh, okay.
Fund 3, and Fund 2. And then also maybe we could address tourism at the same time.
Well, I have a problem addressing those before we address the general fund.
Well,
And
these
Fund
these are, these particular funds
Will all be
aren't really,
affected.
well,
They will all be
Not so
affected
much.
by any change we make in Fund 1. If we make a change to the insurance coverage, if we make a change to our employees, all of those will be affected. Now, we could go ahead and approve them with the knowledge that we may come back and change parts of them.
okay, I'm speaking only to the part of the budget where the department head comes in and we have
Okay.
our discussion with him and we,
Uh-huh.
and if things did
Well,
change
we
after
could
that,
get a
things
good
certainly could
start
change
on
after
these
that, but at
funds.
least we could get that part of it out of the way. And,
You feel better doing that than you would doing the general fund and Fund 1 first?
I think we're waiting for information that we won't have time to discuss before the next meeting. I think we can get through these and then incorporate the information about the loans and the repayment and such for the next meeting. I think we have the information available right now for us to consider these particular funds.
Well, I see all of these funds being influenced for our decisions in Fund 1. And if you don't mind discussing these funds to the extent we can, then we can put off Fund 1. But I see Fund 1 as being, for one thing, shouldn't, Rich?
I was just gonna say, I mean, this is very much an iterative process, so you can, if you change something here, you can come back and change something over there. But when we come down to the end, we'll try to run everything that you talked about and see if there's any gaps. But I mean, it's like, I mean, you're gonna have to go back and forth between these different funds and talk about them anyway, so I don't know that it matters.
And these are mainly utility funds as well. So
I do want to do the utilities as a group because of
Okay,
staff
the
and
street, water, sewer, and,
system development.
Okay.
TV.
TD would be part of the electrical.
yeah.
We should do department number 4, though, that's property with that.
It's out of
Because
the
that's-
general fund.
That's in the-
Well, that's general fund.
Oh, is that
That's
general fund?
general
Oh, I'm
fund.
It's
sorry.
one, it's
No,
part of the general fund as
Okay.
Article 4,
Same as planning.
tourism. fund.
Tourism
Tourism's not
isn't.
general fund. You could do that separately and there's no staff.
We would want to have the tourism rep here.
Sure.
I had suggested that as to be part of the meeting as well, the next meeting.
Tourism?
Fund 8.
How about the police department?
No, that's part of the general
That's
fund.
general fund.
that's a general
Yeah.
fund.
Now, part of your suggestion was that we could put off the information on the loans until the meeting after that?
No,
No?
I said,
No.
we have the information available
Right.
right now to consider these funds.
Yes.
We're waiting for the information on the loans, the payment schedule, how much we have to pay, when we have to pay it.
Right.
We don't have that right now.
Right.
We know we're gonna have all this for the next meeting.
Well,
So
where
we'll get-
I was going is it might give me a few more days to pull all this stuff together. That's all.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
So
Good.
then we'll get the information from you at the next meeting, and then the following meeting, we'll be able to consider.
So you're suggesting street, water, sewer, and tourism?
But I still would like to keep them open until we, we can discuss them and we can go over the line items, but they need to still be very flexible until we handle the general fund. Darlene?
All of these enterprise funds, they include also administrative 21, and we are gonna be dealing with the health insurance.
Right, and this is one of the things that concerns me, is that, that we will be making change to every fund that has to do with Fund 21. And those are almost all of the funds that remain, Department 21 administration.
I guess we could discuss everything except 21 in those funds, we went through the general fund and.
Well, I'm not opposed. If somebody has a suggestion on what order to do it, I'm more than willing to go along with that if we can keep that part of it open. And so do I have a consensus to accept Kevin's tentative schedule? We'll discuss tourism. Shall we have tourism if there's time, or tourism? Well, first we'll discuss the loans. And from there, we'll have the presentation from the Public Works Department regarding the street, water, sewer, and SDC fund. And if there's time, we'll continue to the tourism fund. But now, I think by the schedule that we were presented on health insurance, on the health insurance for the employees, that we have to make some kind of a decision about that at the next meeting, if I'm not, isn't that correct? Because you put in that your notice, you have to put in a notice on the 13th of May.
She has to notify them on Friday.
This Friday.
I thought it said the 13th of May.
That's open, oh,
No, the RFC needs to be done by this Friday.
yeah.
And the RFC stands for?
Request for coverage.
Before we get into that, can I ask a question about the tourism before we get into the insurance stuff real quick, since that's gonna be in the next,
Sure.
okay.
No.
In the packet, I'm curious, on the transit, since we're gonna be discussing tourism in the next meeting, on this transient room tax chart that you gave us in our packet for this week, I'm wondering if our expectation for the 2010, 2011 year is low, because when I went back through and averaged for the last 5 years, it was $121,000, and we're only expecting $100,000 for transient room tax this year.
No, we've only received 100,000. We still have 1 quarter left.
Okay.
And I'm expecting, if trend is right, it's well over $20,000.
Okay. Okay, then I'll go, I'll figure it out. All right, thank you. Sorry.
And the council will have already discussed the 30-70 split by the time we meet next week.
It's on the agenda
It's
for
on the
Monday.
agenda for discussion.
Okay, because I think that should already be done by the time we talk about that department, probably. That decision should be made. So now could we get on to the subject of employees' health insurance?
Yes.
From this letter that was read, it says, it starts off, for the benefit of the public, the city is on CIS, most expensive medical plan. I have attached a spreadsheet showing different premiums and the cost of the city for different plan options. There seems to be a catch-22 to this, and the catch-22 is that we have negotiated with the electrical union to provide our electrical employees with this coverage, this level of coverage, from this very specific company, so I understand, right?
Yes.
And we can't do that unless we have 10 employees that can go into on the same plan. I, for one, am not, and this goes on for 4 more years, the length of the electrical contract. Is that true?
Yes.
Rich, go ahead.
Let me explain it, or attempt to. We had a discussion, the memo you're referring to came from the representative of CIS, Pamela Bowles. The mayor and I and Marion talked to her by speakerphone today. The issue is that the union contract identifies this particular plan for the next 4 years. CIS, by their own rules, cannot deal with separate employee groups, in this case the non-union group. If there's less than 10 people, you have to use the same coverage. So the catch-22 here is that with a union contract that's set on this plan for 4 more years, and we can't deal with a non-union employees separately by CIS's own rules. I don't even know if we could dump CIS and go to another plan because they're identified specifically in the union contract. So that's the conundrum right there. That's the long and the short of it. And the mayor may have a different take on this because he was in the same meeting.
The long and the short of it for me would be that that would be an unfortunate situation. I don't think we should be drawn in because we are having to provide for a certain segment of the union employees, that the same benefits are necessarily extended across the board when it can't be afforded. As I'd like to repeat, the city is on CIS, most expensive medical plan.
And I'm a little confused. I mean, we've got teachers and all kinds of union employees statewide taking severe cuts. Not only in pay, but dramatically.
This is a matter of union negotiation.
They're union as well. They're
But
union level on
we've
every
already
state.
done the negotiation, and we're tied into a contract for 4
We have
more
not seen
years.
this contract, and I mean, is this definitive?
Yes,
Council
council
has.
has.
George?
Can I put a little insight in on this, okay? Number one, just so you know, I was a union employee for a long time. So I've been involved with union contracts. And part of the thing is, with this, because of this particular company and the way this particular company wrote their coverage, okay, it's like this. Either, and basically the easiest way to say it is, they don't discriminate against non-union and union participants with this plan, okay? Their only discrimination is they've got to have 10 people in this plan and 10 people in this plan, okay? And that's the only way.
I think we understand that part.
I know, but what I'm trying to get to is, you can't go back in and change any of these plans unless there's at least 10 people in each plan.
And that's what I
Okay.
understand, is what we
So-
can do though is come at it from the other end. And those are things I think need to be discussed. I'm sorry, George, I interrupted you, that was rude. Would you please continue?
So, the reality about all of this is, okay, is number one, there's two realities. The reality is, if we went out to the general public, to all the other insurance companies, and tried to find somebody else who had an identical plan to what they have that we could offer to the electrical department, we would have to try to do that. The odds of doing that, I'm told, isn't going to happen, okay? But that's just one person's opinion. So the other thing is, then we could go back and look at all these other insurances. You know, the other thing is, there are other things that was brought to my attention that we could possibly do to save some additional money to try to bring our costs back in line, so at least we can meet this year's budget compared to what we had on last year's budget, okay? And Mary Ann brought it to my attention that within the union contract, there was it 2.5%?
2.5%.
2.5% per year can be negotiated to be paid for by the employees. Is that?
Up to
Okay.
10%.
Up for 4 years, so it could be up to 10% over a 4-year period. So initially, that's what we have, unless we're going to take this out and we're going to say, we're going to look for somebody else between now and Friday. Okay?
We could require a higher percentage of participation by non-union employees. We don't have to treat, I'm all in favor of unions, but everybody in the world has got to know that the electrical union has a very strong union. And because they have negotiated to provide a certain level of coverage, I understand that because of the insurance company, We cannot have various levels of coverages, but we can have various levels of participation by the employees. I don't think, although the electrical contract may say this is limited to 2.5, I don't believe we're limited to 2.5 on the other employees in degree of participation. And I did notice on some of the information that was provided in a very good study that was done, that in fact some cities are requiring 20%, others are requiring 15%. Some are not covering all of the dependents. There was one that covered nothing but the employees. So there are other options, George.
And I don't know if you're going to agree with this, but part of this seems to me needs to be something that the council needs to go and establish policy and talk with the employees, and I know I'm the mayor and I'm on the council, so I feel this is something that the council should address.
About the budget.
And that as far as the budget, that you need to try to figure out how we can make our goals within our budget, okay? Because if you go back to what our goals were and what it said that if we were lacking funds to be able to maintain those funds, then we were to address those issues, okay? So I think we're getting a little bit out of the realm of the budget. Huh?
I don't agree.
Well, read the guidelines of the rules.
I have read the guidelines, and I have talked to enough insurance companies and enough insurance representatives to understand that the budgeting of these are budget issues.
I'm not saying it's not a budget issue. I'm just saying that you're getting out of the guidelines of what we're supposed to do as a budget committee. I'm saying I think that what you're wanting to be done should be done by the council. That's all I'm trying to say.
I understand what you're trying to say, George. Point taken. Don?
Hey, question for Mary Ann. Time-wise, can we change anything on insurance to be, is there time to even change anything on the medical?
I don't think so.
I don't think, if we decide something today, there's not, as far as I seem to understand, we can't change it this year anyway.
That is correct, but if you'll notice, that Pam did suggest that we, in January, you could, or look at it now, and then in January, if you wanted to, well, we're locked in at 5A, I'm sorry, never mind that. She had written something in here.
It's at the bottom.
Is it at the bottom?
Yeah, we can possibly change plans.
Oh, plans, that's right, if you reopen the contract for negotiations.
Which is something you probably wouldn't want to do if it's negotiated for 4 years. Am I correct,
You
George?
can open it
Oh, no,
anytime.
you can try to reopen it again. It's just, it's, in a negotiation aspect, it's really hard to, we just closed negotiation a couple months ago, to all of a sudden reopen negotiation
Exactly.
and try to ask somebody for,
No,
we
I
want to
agree.
give you less. It's a bad time to negotiate.
I agree.
Maybe we should change the.
I think that it would be beneficial to check with the electric union to see if they have an insurance for their employees that we could buy into for those electric employees that is comparable to the plan that we have. There still is enough employees left. I think that we need to look at various options. I think it's ridiculous that we're locked into providing the very most expensive plan available. We're not the richest towns. And when you compare it, we're providing a better plan than most of the other cities that were provided to us on the list, and I don't think we should be doing that. Laura?
I agree with that. I think the state, all the employees have had to take cuts, and I believe unions are as well, and I think that we check the city, electrical unions for that matter, and find compromises have been made. This is a countrywide, these contracts that we were put into 5 years, now, I don't assume that medical coverage is not going to increase in cost for those 5 years. We're just
It's all
indebted to
part of the
them.
contract.
It is one company, but they can
They can
increase that
increase
And
coverage.
they
yes.
have.
So I would sincerely say that, yeah, we have to do it this year, but we should break this thing completely down and look at what we're into and change where we can.
Eva?
As I mentioned before in the last meeting, there are some people that are union and some people that are not union for the county. And when you go into it, it is negotiation like we're talking about, so there's a certain amount of insurance coverage that you get. Insurance goes up every year, every year. So what happens is that then it reopens, like they're talking about, you can reopen the contract and negotiations a little bit, bring back and be, okay, well, here's the amount that we said that we would increase it. Say it's, I'm gonna throw out a random amount, 4%. But they're saying it's gonna be 25% increase to keep the same plan. That's when the employees and the people get together and they look, then they can do a cost comparison like you're talking about. The problem is when you have small numbers, it's hard to get people to actually bid in on it because they go, oh no, I can't even touch it. Excuse me. Or, you know, so you won't have this huge pool of people like you would think. You'll probably only have a few that you might be able to choose from, but you might be able to get a mirror coverage, you know, somebody who wants to steal you away from CIS or that kind of a thing. And you can negotiate those kind of things, and that's when you're going to start getting into, when they're talking about a large increase in the increase going up, then you're going to be looking at, okay, well, maybe we're going to change our deductibles, maybe we're going to change those kind of things. But you're dealing with the base amount of money. That's what the budget does, is it deals with money, not like, well, you're going to have a $250 deductible or you're going to have a $1,000 deductible.
I agree. I
It's
just
just
wanted
money.
to be able to fund an adequate level when still reduce our costs. Is why I was asking for, you know, the various different plans. And I am definitely interested in seeing what we're funding compared to what other cities are funding. And I don't think that we should be funding at a higher level.
We provided that information
Yeah.
in your book.
Yes,
It
I
shows
got it.
similar sized cities and what the deductibles are, what the participation levels are,
Right.
and all that.
It is.
And it's all with the Blue Cross? Are all these Blue Cross, or are there other companies involved, like,
United Healthcare.
Oh, yeah.
And it's pretty obvious we're not going to be able to change plans this year. But my point is we should be able to change, just like the county did 2 years ago, change the level of participation by the employees that are non-union. If we're obligated by union employees to participate at 100%, then that's what we have to do. But if we're not obligated by contract to do that, I think we need to look at having the employees pay a percentage. And I don't mean just increasing it 2.5 a year. So,
Point of order. Hour's 9 o'clock. Motion to adjourn.
Motion to continue.
Motion second.
Oh, motion to continue.
Motion
Sorry.
to continue.
second?
Can't adjourn, huh?
That would be forever.
Yes.
Oh, I see.
There's a motion to adjourn, to continue, and there's been a second. Do I have everybody in agreement? Yay?
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Aye.
Want to continue this conversation?
Well, yeah, I'd like to see what the conclusion is.
We've got to continue the meeting.
No, I think we're in an impasse here.